What's up everyone, welcome back to Workshop Rebuild. In today's episode, I'll be comparing the Bolens HT20 to the John Deere 400. This video was suggested to me by a subscriber. I thought it would be a great idea to compare both of these garden tractors as they are both in running condition. I rebuilt both of these tractors so I know them inside and out, and both of them have an attachment on them currently, so it would be great to share with you guys a comparison of both of these machines, and I'll do that in today's video. So I'm going to be comparing both of these tractors behind me here. I'll give you guys info on all of the details of the drivetrain, the fuel system, the hydraulic system, the tires which are currently on these tractors, and also I'll talk a little bit about the weight and the PTO which is on each of these tractors. So with that said, let's dig right into the comparison. The first thing that I'd like to discuss is the drivetrain on both of these tractors. When I open the hood on the Bolens HT20, you will notice the engine is placed exactly in the middle of the length of the hood. This is a 20 horsepower air-cooled engine, which is the Kohler K532. I've done a teardown video and a rebuild video specifically on this engine. It is very similar to the John Deere 400, so you guys will be able to follow the exact same steps like I did on the rebuild of the John Deere 400 engine. This engine is shaft driven, and the shaft follows underneath and goes to the rear end, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. So let's head on to the John Deere 400. On the John Deere 400, it is basically the same setup. We will lift our hood. This is a fiberglass hood compared to the metal hood on the Bolens, so that is another thing to mention. But we'll focus on the drivetrain, and this is also a Kohler K532. Since I rebuilt this engine from ground up, this engine has been bored out to 10th thou over, so technically speaking, this Kohler K532 should have a little bit more horsepower than that one over there. Even though the hood is open on the John Deere 400, there's not even much access to this engine. You'd have to take off these side panels on both sides and even the shrouds of the engine to get to the engine if you need to do any work or even clean out the cylinder heads. John Deere did put a little bit more effort into the styling of this tractor compared to the Bolens. As you will notice, the Kohler has the original shrouds on both sides, and that is a factory Kohler engine. We have the exact same setup on this machine, but they also put on John Deere side panels which give it a little bit more styling. Besides the styling, both engines transfer power to the rear end of the tractor via a drive shaft. It will go into the hydraulic pump that transfers power to the hydraulic motor. Both setups are exactly the same on either of these tractors, but in the rear end, it gets a little bit different. On the rear end of the Bolens HT20, we only have a single speed transmission, so all the power that comes out of the hydraulic motor will power the transmission. There's no option to select high or low, but that is an option on the John Deere 400. The John Deere 400 has a peerless rear end, which is the transmission. That is a manufacturer which set this up for John Deere, and Peerless had a 2-speed option, so you do have a high or a low, which is a very nice feature. If you just want to go very slow, you just put it in low, and if you want to go a little bit faster, you put it in high speed. So I talked about both of these garden tractors over here, and I almost have to give a bonus point to the John Deere 400 because it's very nice to have a high and a low option, especially if you're not doing anything, you're just pulling a cart or something like that. Just put it in high and cruise away. As for the Bolens, it might be a little bit slower, but then again, we might have a little bit torque. Another thing I'd like to mention on the Bolens HT20 and on the John Deere 400 is the braking system. The braking system is very different. On the Bolens HT20, we have disc brakes. Another good thing about the disc brakes is they are not directly on the hub themselves, so they're a little bit towards the inside, and we can remove the disc brakes if we need to service them at any point of time without taking the wheels off. As for on the John Deere 400, we have to remove the wheel, we have to remove the hub to get to those brake drums, and it just takes a little bit more time to service them if needed. So if you had to ask me which braking system I prefer, I actually prefer the Bolens braking system a little bit better, very easy to service, and maybe just a little bit better than those brake drums on the John Deere 400. So right now I'm going to discuss the fuel system on both of these tractors. On the Bolens HT20, you open up the hood, you fill in the fuel right there, and we have a 5 US gallon fuel tank, which is very accessible. On the Bolens HT20, originally it was a mechanical fuel pump, but I upgraded that to an electric fuel pump, and you'll see that right here on the side. I think the electric fuel pump just suits this machine a little bit better. As for the John Deere 400, we have the fuel tank towards the back of the garden tractor, so that is behind the seat. That's where you fill it up. And originally, the John Deere 400 came with an electric fuel pump, and it is installed underneath the fuel tank itself, so it's not very accessible. So I do prefer this method. Open up the hood, pop in some fuel, and fill in your fuel. Obviously, the mechanical fuel pump does not exist anymore, but you can always upgrade your Bolens and have your electric fuel pump accessible towards the front corner of this tractor. I discussed the drivetrain on both of these garden tractors over here. If you guys have any of these tractors at home, leave a comment down below what you guys make of either of these tractors, what you guys prefer, and what you guys learned in today's video. But right now, I'd like to also discuss the hydraulic system on both of these garden tractors. We also need hydraulic fluid in the rear end to even make this tractor move anywhere. And also, if we want to have some attachments which are hydraulically driven, we need even more hydraulic oil. And for that, we do need a hydraulic system. So I'll discuss the hydraulic system on both of these garden tractors right now. I'm going to discuss the hydraulic system on the Bolens HT20 first. All our hydraulic oil is housed within our transmission. It is the lowest point on the transmission. The hydraulic motor will suck up the oil from the rear end. It will power our rear end, which is the transmission, and transfer power to our wheels, making this tractor move forward or backward, whichever way we give the tractor an input. So that's pretty straightforward. I discussed this while I was rebuilding this garden tractor. But now if we want to have some attachments which are hydraulically driven, or even that need to just move up or down, we need a cylinder in our system, and we also need a valve block. The valve block on the Bolens HT20 is right behind the dash panel. It is only a 2-spool valve block instead of a 3-spool valve block like on the John Deere 400. But what's very interesting on the Bolens HT20 is even though we have 2 spools, we have 4 hydraulic couplers. We have 2 on the front of the garden tractor and 2 on the back of the garden tractor. So what that means is we can have something on the front which is hydraulically driven off of 1 spool, and the same spool will also activate the rear hydraulic couplers. It's very neat the way they did this. I think that was a very wise decision by Bolens to do it that way, because you have 4 hydraulic couplers on 1 tractor off of 1 spool. Now I'll discuss the hydraulic system on the John Deere 400. All the hydraulic oil is stored within the rear end as well, so that is underneath the transmission. The hydraulic motor will suck up that hydraulic oil, and that will give power to our transmission and then to our rear wheels, which will make this tractor go forward or backward. So that's very simple. But this tractor specifically has a bigger valve block. It is a 3-spool valve block, but we also have another option on this garden tractor, which is power steering. For that, we also need a little bit of fluid diverted to the front cylinder, which will give us a power steering option, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. The 3 valve spools on this garden tractor will allow us to lift or lower the rear cylinder. That is for our 3-point hitch. We could also have a mid-mount deck, which will also allow us to use the exact same cylinder off that 1 lever, and that will lift the deck up or down. Off of 1 spool, we will be able to activate the 3-point hitch or the mid-deck mower. Then we have 2 more valve spools. One will allow us to operate the front auxiliary hydraulics. As you will see, all 4 auxiliary hydraulics are on the front of the John Deere 400, not like on the Bolens HT20. We have 2 up front and 2 in the back. So it's a little bit more balanced on the Bolens, but John Deere has all 4 of them up front. This will give you the possibility to have a snowblower, which has an up or a down function of auxiliary hydraulics, and a chute which you can pivot from left to right. For that, you'll need 2 auxiliary hydraulics, and for those 2 auxiliary hydraulics, you will have 2 different levers. I was able to discuss the hydraulic system on the Bolens HT20 and the John Deere 400. If you guys have any questions about the hydraulic system or anything that I'm talking about in this video, leave a comment down below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And if you guys are enjoying this video, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button down below as well. But right now, I'll talk about the tires and the weight of both of these garden tractors. First glance, you will notice the front tires look identical. Yes, the tread on both of the front tires is a little bit different, but the front rims are exactly the same size and the tires are basically the exact same. I'm going to give you guys a close-up view on this tread and the tread on the John Deere 400. These tires are a little bit newer, but the Bolens HT20 has very good tires as well. I really like this pattern, to be honest. This one is very generic. I think you guys will find these basically at any store, but those right there are pretty neat. They have quite a bit of design in them, and these happen to be a Terra tire. The front tires on the Bolens HT20 are 18 by 8.5 by 8 wide. So that's a very nice sized tire. And the John Deere 400 has the exact same tire size. It is 18 by 8.5 by 8. So basically the exact same size, or they are the same size, just a different tread pattern on the front tires. Now when we look at the back tires on the Bolens HT20, you will see they are a little bit sharper. than on the John Deere 400. These are the original lawn tires that you'd find on any smaller lawn tractor as well. And they look very nice, but they don't perform as well as the ones that are on the Bolens HT20. These are meant for softer ground, and these will dig into the ground a little bit better. I believe these are the original tires on the Bolens HT20. They are made by Goodyear, and the size on these is 26 by 12 by 12. So a very nice sized tire for a very heavy duty garden tractor. The tread on them is just great. I haven't had any issues even in the snow with them, but I didn't have much ice either. And so they performed really well for me, especially with that front mounted blade. On the back of the John Deere 400, we also have a set of Goodyear tires. These also happen to be 26 by 12 by 12. So on the rear end of the John Deere 400 and on the rear end of the Bolens HT20, we have the exact same tires, just the rims are painted a different color. And obviously you could interchange these tires if you wanted to, or even upgrade from your lawn tires. So if you guys have any of these tractors at home, if you guys have a John Deere 400 or a Bolens HT20 and you guys want to pick any of these up, don't worry, the tires are exactly the same, so you guys can swap them however you like. So now I'll move on to the weight of this John Deere 400. After that, I'm going to move on to the Bolens because it is a little bit heavier than the John Deere 400. The dry weight on the John Deere 400 should be around 975 pounds, which equals around 445 kilograms. This is pretty heavy for a garden tractor. Nowadays, they seem to be a little bit lighter, I believe. So the weight on the John Deere 400 seems to be just fine. If we look at this John Deere 400 specifically, I have on the rear end a 3-point hitch mounted, which adds a little bit of weight to this tractor. I'd assume that's around 25 pounds, which is around 10 kilograms. I also have a PTO kit mounted. That is the rear gearbox with the drive shaft, which runs underneath of this tractor. That is even heavier than the 3-point hitch. I'd rate that at around 40 pounds. But just to let you guys know, I did not weigh any of this. I'm just assuming it's that weight. So I'll give you guys a calculation at the end of this. So if the PTO kit is around 40 pounds, that would be around 18 kilos. So we're going to add that to the dry weight of this garden tractor. And I'm really not sure how heavy that rear mounted rototiller is, but it's pretty heavy. I would assume it's 175 pounds at least. So if the rototiller weighs in at around 175 pounds, the calculation with the dry weight and all the attachments on this machine will come to roughly around 1,200 pounds. That's pretty heavy, but it's still not as heavy as the Bolens HT20. So I'll go over to the Bolens HT20 and discuss the weight of that garden tractor. So I'm over here by the Bolens HT20. This tractor is a little bit higher than the John Deere 400, and it's also built a little bit more beefy. The frame rails seem to be just a little bit thicker, and everything has a little bit more weight to it, especially the rear end. That's also a little bit heavier. I noticed that when I was rebuilding it. The dry weight of the Bolens HT20 comes in at around 1,090 pounds, which is around 490 kilograms. That's already over 100 pounds heavier than the John Deere 400 in a dry state. On the front of this garden tractor, I also have a front blade. This is also an angle blade at the same time, but it's also not just the blade. Underneath, we also have an attraction, which allows this blade to move up and down. So that adds a little bit of weight as well. I would assume this weighs in at around 80 pounds altogether. So we're going to add that to the dry weight, and we'll figure out how much this weighs. On the back of the Bolens HT20, I also have two wheel weights on either side. I believe they weigh in at around 50 pounds, so that's just under 25 kilograms. And if we add all the weight together, we come to 1,220 pounds. The John Deere 400 is around 1,200 pounds, but I have to say the rototiller is very heavy. So with this front blade on the Bolens HT20, it doesn't add that much weight. I would prefer a little bit more weight for a garden tractor because then you will have a little bit more traction, and especially the rear end of this garden tractor will allow you to have more traction with those rear wheels and the wheel weights, especially if you want to have a plow on the front end. I'm almost done with the comparison, but I still have to talk about the front PTO, which is on both of these garden tractors, and I'll also talk about the steering mechanism on both of these tractors. So I'm going to focus on the Bolens HT20 and the front PTO. When we look right between the battery and the engine, you will notice the front pulley has 3 belts going down to the front PTO. The front PTO has a guard on the bottom, but the PTO is right in between the axle. So we have a rear mount PTO, which can power a rear mounted rototiller. I do have one for this Bolens HT20, but I have never mounted it yet. I just went through it and I might mount that very soon. But also the same PTO goes all the way to the front of the garden tractor, so you'll see down below we have the same shaft which acts as a front PTO. I do not know what they would power on the front of the garden tractor. Maybe they had a snowblower which was run by the PTO, but I'm not quite sure. This is a very similar setup like on the John Deere 400. On the John Deere 400, I can't share much with you guys. I did a full video on this PTO system. When we look through the grill of the John Deere 400, you will see a little bit of the PTO. So that right there is our crankshaft. We have a pulley, but we also only have 2 belts going down to the front PTO, which is right here. We also have a front PTO, which is this right here. And the same front PTO acts as the rear PTO, which is still mounted on the front. It just has a shaft coming out the back. That right there will power my rear mounted rototiller. I just removed the shaft because I still have to make an adjustment to the front pulley. Looking at the PTO system on both of these tractors, it's very similar. The Bolens for some reason has 3 belts and the John Deere has actually 2 belts. So I personally would prefer the John Deere PTO system because you only have 2 belts to replace, and I do believe 2 belts will have enough traction to power any of this equipment, especially with that 48-inch rototiller in the back that you can transfer power with just 2 belts. So I would personally prefer the John Deere 400 PTO, but both of these PTOs are very good. With the PTO system out of the way, I'm going to talk about the steering system on the Bolens HT20, and then we'll talk about the steering system on the John Deere 400. You will notice the angle of the steering wheel is also quite different. It is very vertical compared to the John Deere 400. It has more of an angle on it, and the Bolens HT20 goes down and it has a mechanism which then transfers power mechanically all the way to the front end, and I'll show you that on the front, which is on the front right. It comes down under the foot pedal off to the side. It has a drag link going all the way to the front. It hooks up to this spindle. This spindle transfers power to the tie rod and shoots it to the other side. And this is our steering mechanism. Very simple and very straightforward. Many garden tractors have this setup and it is a very cheap setup. The steering system on the John Deere 400 is completely different. We have a steering wheel which is shaft driven all the way to the bottom. There's a gearbox that sends then a motion to our front valve, and this will be able to open or close, and that will divert fluid to our front cylinder. So this is a power assisted steering system, and this obviously relies on hydraulic fluid. You'll notice there is way more involved. Obviously we have our hydraulic valve underneath and all the hydraulics have to function. This is obviously much more expensive, especially if you have to do any repairs, but it is much nicer to operate a power assisted steering. You need very little effort to steer this system, so I would prefer the John Deere 400, but when it comes to repair costs, I would rather prefer the repair cost of the Bolens HT20. I'm going to end the comparison video of the John Deere 400 and the Bolens HT20 right here. I touched upon various topics of both of these garden tractors, and I hope you guys learned something today. If you guys are in the market for any of these tractors, they are both very good. On the John Deere 400, you have a couple parts which are a little bit more expensive. As for the Bolens HT20, a lot of it is mechanical, so it's very simple to fix this. There are pros and cons for both of these garden tractors, but I'd really like to know what you guys make of both of these garden tractors. Leave a comment down below. Let everybody know what you guys think, because you guys might help other people out there if they are in the market for any of these garden tractors right here. If you guys enjoyed this video, please hit that like button down below. It helps me out with my channel. It helps also with the growth, and it also gives me feedback if I'm doing a good job. As I mentioned before, this video was suggested by a subscriber, and I always check my comments because I always want to hear from you guys, and I also want to learn and grow as I'm making these videos. And I'll always try to upload twice a week, so if you guys are interested in stuff like this or even the rebuild videos that I do, don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below.